Hey, how's it going? It's Ken here, working on my Pride Month videos here, number 2. And number 1 talked about the concept of love and does it exist, and the history of my personal history of dealing with love and my concept of it. So as I said in the other videos, Pride Month is all about self-expression, and so that's what I'm working on. It's not so a little bit on the conceptual side because I'm a conceptual person, but for the most part focusing on the celebration that is me, because I'm sexy and you know it. But anyway, so today I wanted to talk about the concept of fantasy versus reality. I touched a little bit on this in my last video, the concept of fantasy, right? So I had this fantasy about meeting a nice, normal, beautiful, intelligent, successful woman, and us hitting it off and being happily ever after. And I tried to fulfill that fantasy in real life, and it got really close to it. I even got to found the girl and spent time with her and all that. But alas, poor Yorick, which would be much more interesting if you could see from another perspective as I hold this camera out in my hand. Alas, poor Yorick. But you just have to imagine that because you can only see from Yorick's eyes. But yeah, it was not a reality. It wasn't. It was. She was real. I was real. We were really hanging out, but that was the idea that was going to be what my life entailed. That was a fantasy, and therefore it didn't work. And so I wanted to kind of to focus on this a little bit more today, so we all have fantasies, right? We all have fantasies about, fantasies are that they're fantastical. They're either out of reach or just shouldn't be reached for altogether. As much as an American white girl might want to imagine being a Persian princess in 1001 Arabian Nights, she's not, right? She'll never be. That's a fantasy, right? It's not a reality. And that's not, it's good to fantasize. It's good to have those fantasies. I have some fantasies, but I understand the concept that they're just that, they're fantasies, right? I have this one fantasy where I am abducted by these beautiful alien women and taken up to this spaceship, and they do all sorts of naughty things with me because they're after my awesome human DNA, right? Oh, you can't see me winking with the glasses on. That's a bummer. But I'm winking underneath these glasses. That's a fantasy. It's not a reality. I wouldn't want, even if I could fulfill that, even if that was a thing that could happen, I wouldn't want it to, right? Because, abduction kidnapping, that's not cool. You know, like even if it's by hot alien women, which probably don't exist. They probably look all weird and shit, I would imagine. And you know, and then basically, so I'd be kidnapped and raped, which regardless of whether they're aliens or not, that's horrible. That shouldn't really happen, right? But it doesn't mean that the idea of it can't be exciting, right? And you can role play that scenario maybe, but you don't even necessarily need to do that. You can just have the idea, and that in itself is exciting, right? Or you know, you can take it to the next level and role play it out, and that could be exciting too. But again, it's a play. It's you know, it's like interactive theater, if you will. It's like a really good virtual experience. It's not reality, and that's one of the great things about fantasy, is it allows us to go into these worlds and explore them with safety. And I was kind of poo-pooing a little bit on Burning Man in my last video, and just kind of backtrack a little bit on what I was saying. Yes, it's not a real adventure. It is, you know, the Disney theme park version of Mad Max is what Burning Man is. But that's not to say that Burning Man is a bad thing, or doesn't serve its purpose, or can't be enjoyable, or can't be fun, or shouldn't exist. No, it's great. It's great that Burning Man exists for the weekend road warrior. And there's nothing wrong with being a weekend road warrior. That's perfectly acceptable. And while us real road warriors might poo-poo that a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, that, you know, and then there comes that question, you know, where is that line between fantasy and reality? And if you fantasize for something for long enough, do you end up having to take the next steps in making that a reality? I don't know. I can't tell you. I can't answer that one. I'm not an expert. I only know what I know from my own life. And that is that for me, adventuring isn't a fantasy. For me, going on these great road trips, I went on a 1.5 year road trip, you know, that happened, and it was only supposed to be for a couple months, but I just kept going, because you know, I was successful with it, I guess you could say. I gotta pause because there's a leaf blower. Man, people sure are nuts about their lawn care this week. Anyway, but as I was saying, there's a place for fantasy and there's a place for reality. And the thing is with fantasy is, yes, number one, it's very safe, right? You know, like porn, for example, is a form of fantasy play, right? So you've got, you know, when done properly, you have this scenario that's concocted in somebody's brain, right? And they go and they get directors, cameramen, and actors, and there's you know, all sorts of safety people there, and then they go and they act out this fantasy for this person, put it on film so that they can watch it, and and see their fantasy come to life. And maybe that's part of their fantasy is being able to create this thing and make it happen. And maybe it doesn't really exactly happen as you see it on the screen. There's a lot of things that they cut out and whatever, a lot of sitting around and eating donuts and stuff. That's part of reality. But you're creating this fantasy, and that's good. There's this movie called Pirates XXX. You know why the XXX stands for. It means not the actual, not a kid's film. Anyway, so this movie is a really great movie. I recommend you see it. Pirates, and it's about pirates, and they go around and do pirate stuff and have all sorts of sex. And there's this captain who's kind of an idiot pirate hunter who doesn't know what he's doing, and that his crew is full of pirates. It's really funny. I like those kind of movies too. I like the funny ones because it's like, there's nothing quite as enjoyable as a smile. And a good way to get a smile out of somebody is to make them laugh. But anyway, I'm digressing. What was I talking about? Fantasy, reality, porn. So, and those lines where fantasy and reality blur. You might have a fantasy, where, like, maybe I have a fantasy that involves, a couple of midgets and some clowns and a giant 14-foot inflatable clown suit, and this is something that's totally doable. It's way more doable than, say, like the alien thing, right? And it doesn't sound particularly terrible. It's all, consenting adults, yada yada. Sounds great, so that's something that could, like, say, become a reality if I wanted to put the effort into it. But with a lot of fantasies, because they're fantastical, the amount of effort that's involved in putting forward into creating that, it's not worth it, generally speaking. If I was going to do that, I'd have to make it into a movie so that I could recoup some of my investments costs, because I'm figuring it's going to cost several $1,000s to pull that one off. Just in the the amenities alone. just in the decorations to create that sort of situation. But and then there's other fantasies, like, I have a fantasy where I'm like a pimp, right? But I would never do that because although I have nothing against prostitutes, it's not really the reality of it doesn't turn me on, right? So there's that distinction between reality and fantasy, right? So in my fantasy world, the idea of being a pimp and having a bunch of hoes is really, really exciting, right? But in real life, that would not. That would just be like, sounds to me like a big giant freaking headache, trying to manage a bunch of hoes and Drexel getting his cut. That's a character from a movie. I'm not Drexel. But so I wouldn't actually want to do that. That does not sound like a good time to me. But in my imagination, in imagination land, that sounds really exciting. But in reality, not so much. So you have to be able to make these distinctions between our fantasies and our realities. But getting back to, say, Jocelyn, the hot professor. All right, now, this was a fantasy tried to make it reality. And while I could have tried to force it, it wasn't a reality. It couldn't become a reality because it was a fantasy. So when you have a partner, which hopefully at some point here I will have a partner. Right now I am partnerless. But when you're with your partner, you and your partner will both have fantasies. And they will be different fantasies because you're different people and you fantasize about different things, right? Pretty basic. All right. Now, because your fantasies are not the same, does not mean that the other person is a weirdo or a kook or crazy. I've been with some girls that have had some very, very, very bizarre fantasies that they wanted to be played out. As well as I have some very, very bizarre fantasies too. I mean, aliens and clowns, it doesn't get much weirder than that, right? So, but it's important to remember it's just play, and even though it might not be your thing, right, it is important as long as it's safe and done safely and properly, and it's understood that it is a fantasy, that you should try to help your partner enjoy themselves in that fantasy. It's a responsibility you have to your partner. Now, that doesn't mean that you're your partner's slave and you have to do whatever it is to make them happy, but you should have an earnest desire to see your partner happy within reason. And where people define what reason is and isn't is different depending on the person. But there are some things that are obviously, reasonable and unreasonable. Like, are you going to get hurt? If you are going to get hurt in some way, obviously it is reasonable in order to say, no, I do not want to get hurt. Or if you do want to get hurt, then that's fine, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that either. But try not to do any permanent damage is what we always say. So exactly. So now, I had this one girl, I'm not going to mention her name, I'm just going to say she had a thing and it was weird. Hold on. All right. And she had this thing where she would use this waterproof makeup to make her skin blue, right? And then she would soak in an ice bath, right? She would soak in an ice bath, so she was ice cold, and then she would take tranquilizers so that she couldn't move. She was conscious, but she couldn't move. And basically she was playing out this scenario, and it was just that, it was a fantasy, it was a scenario, in which she was dead, basically. She was dead, and somebody was having sex with her corpse, all right? That's pretty freaking weird, all right? In my book, I'm not gonna judge. In my book, that's pretty weird, not really into it. But, it wasn't, no one was getting hurt, right? And it made her happy. We didn't stay together very long. It was a little too weird for me. That happens, you know. Well, different strokes for different folks. But, you know, it's important that you be willing to, again, entertain your partner's fantasies within reason, and they don't have to be your fantasies. You don't have to share the fantasies. It's okay to take turns fulfilling each other's fantasies.